Thanks for listening to the Farmers Weekly podcast. Do remember you can subscribe to Farmers Weekly magazine and get all the latest news, views and market prices by visiting fwi.co.uk. Welcome to this special episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast, the Farmers Weekly Question Time event at Plumpton College in East Sussex. Recorded in front of a live studio audience on Thursday the 20th of February 2025, farmers, students and other guests quiz industry leaders on topical agricultural issues. We hope you enjoy the listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to our Farmers Weekly Question Time event here at Plumpton College, a specialist land-based college here in East Sussex. I'm your host, Johan Tasker. Plumpton is an outstanding college with a proud history, farming about 2,500 acres with courses in agriculture, horticulture and viticulture. And a big thank you to Plumpton for hosting us this evening, and a thank you to our sponsors, Savills and Lantra, the skills and training organisation for the land-based sector. Farmers Weekly Question Time is all about having a healthy debate and a lively discussion. And with that in mind, let me introduce our panel of 5 experts who'll be answering your questions this evening. On my immediate right, James McCleary is the Liberal Democrat MP for Lewes, a seasoned campaigner. He's fighting for better local health services, an end to sewage dumping in rivers and coastal waters, and for stronger local communities. Next to James, Flavian Obiero, better known perhaps to some of us as the Kenyan pig farmer, is a Kenyan-born farmer based in Hampshire. Flavian has been working in agriculture for 14 years and rears free-range pigs, sheep and goats with his partner Nikki and son Noah. Next to Flavian, Kelly Hewson-Fisher joined Savills in 2023 as a director and head of rural research, where she leads a team of 10 researchers. Kelly has 20 years experience working in the environment, food and water sector and a practical farming background. Turning to my immediate left, Amy Jackson is a communications consultant who spent her early career working on farms before moving into agricultural PR. Today, Amy specialises in crisis management with a particular interest in dairy and the livestock sector. And next to Amy, Mark Lumsden-Taylor is founder and president of the Rural Policy Group think tank, an expert in finance and environmental social governance. Mark's goal is to secure a financially and environmentally stable farming sector. So ladies and gentlemen, that's our panel. Please put your hands together and give them a big Plumpton welcome. We're going to go straight to our first question. Adrian Pearce, please.
Adrian Pearce from Creston Reeves Chartered Accountants. This won't come as any great surprise to anybody in the room, this question, and perhaps particularly pertinent given the meeting at the Treasury with various industry bodies on Tuesday. But I'd just be interested in the panel's view on what the likelihood is of the Treasury softening its stance on inheritance tax. And obviously I'm talking about agricultural property relief and business property relief.
Thank you. Thanks, Adrian. What's the likelihood of the Treasury softening its stance on inheritance tax? And I'm going to go to James first.
Thank you. This is obviously the question, and I was fully expecting to be asked it. As a Liberal Democrat, obviously we opposed the government's decision to go ahead with this change. I've said to a few people already, this is a really good example of what a decision driven by Treasury to save money, designed by people who have no idea how rural communities and the farming industry work, looks like. It's a very poorly constructed decision. It won't raise that much money in Treasury terms, and will do an enormous amount of harm. My own family background, I'm from a family of farmers in Devon, dairy farmers. We have a small family farm there, and if my granddad was still around, I can assure you he would have much shorter and blunter words to describe what the government have decided to do. And I'd say alongside that, the thing that it masked at the same time was the tapering of BPS. which actually in some ways in the short term will be even more damaging for smaller farms because the amount of money they're going to lose in the short term is actually a lot. And for some farms, that's going to be tens of thousands of pounds disappearing that they hadn't budgeted for. And I felt that kind of got slipped through at the same time and hasn't been spoken about enough, in my view. So, Adrian, will they soften their stance? I know the NFU have made a proposal about a clawback scheme. There's a possibility they might. However, I think that it would be fair to say the government have sunk a lot of political capital into sticking by this decision so far. And it's going to be quite hard for them to back out of it in the short term. I really hope they do, because it's clearly iniquitous and it's clearly hugely damaging. Whether they will, we shall see. But certainly I and my colleagues in Parliament will continue to keep up the pressure on them to do so.
Thank you. And for people who might have missed it, basically the government, the Treasury, called in the farm leaders from England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland to a meeting in London on Tuesday. I think we, on the Farmers Weekly podcast, we described it as a chink of light on inheritance tax when we heard about that meeting that it was going to go ahead. We are describing it now as a candle being snuffed out, actually, because the government, there was simply no movement at all. Mark Lumsden-Taylor, the likelihood of the Treasury softening its stance on inheritance tax?
Yeah, in short, no. Absolutely not. Take the political capital perspective out of it. In my former life, I spent a lot of time in Westminster lobbying and securing funding for agricultural sector. And this has sat on the Chancellor's desk over quite a few Chancellors. This isn't new. This has been considered in the Treasury a number of times. And the Chancellor has effectively, whoever it was at the time, will have looked at it and gone, politically dynamite, no, we'll find something else, we'll find something else, we'll find something else. And this time they've said, we're gonna go with it. I was chairing a roundtable last night in Kent, having a similar conversation around what does this actually mean for growers and so the wider agricultural community. And again, we're not going to have we're not going to spend the whole night talking about this, but what we did say was the actual financial and economic impacts being really clear and prescriptive, not just the difference between the way in which the Treasury's analysed APR versus BPR and the combination of that, but the actual financial impacts about effectively treating this as another direct cost to farmers, right? So it goes straight off their net profit. What does that actually mean in their ability to find the money to do that, whether it's over 10 years, 5 years, whatever mechanism they've got? That, for me, is the debate, and it's the debate within the debate. So this isn't a punt, by the way, for the Confederation of British Industry, but I sit on a number of their councils, and I would urge businesses to get involved with those lobbyists who are looking at it from a purely financial perspective, because take all the emotion out of this debate, rightly or wrongly, it is all about that bottom line and the money. And I think whilst they've lobbied effectively and they've raised the profile of it, and who was talking about food prior to this, right? How much of food was in the media till the APR discussion? Suddenly the media were all over it. No one talked about food prior to that, other than food price inflation. But I think business needs to come together in a slightly different angle to target the Treasury in a different way. Because bluntly, the government won't change their stance based on the rhetoric that's currently there. And that's based on quite a lot of market intelligence, for want of a better phrase.
Thank you. Kelly Hewson-Fisher, what do you think? I mean, at Savills, you have a lot of clients, you do a lot of rural research, obviously, by the nature of your job. Do you see the government changing its mind at all?
I think up until Tuesday, there was the possibility of that softening. I think the messages that have come out from that meeting on Tuesday have been very hard, that the door is firmly shut. So I think up until then, there was the possibility that there might be tweaks made to take into account an ageing generation, or potentially to raise that, that 1 million. But absolutely from Tuesday, I think from our feelings, it was very much a shut door. We have done a spotlight that's downstairs, actually, that you can take. And in the middle, there is some modelling that we've done, looking at the impacts of this. And I think there's the exam question, what was this set out to do? And the government themselves set out a statement saying that they want to raise money to fix the public finances whilst protecting small family farms. Well, our data shows that over 50 hectares would have an inheritance tax liability. So it is going to affect everybody over that 50 hectare size. So unfortunately, I don't think they're going to soften.
Flavian Obioro, you farm yourself as a farmer. Are you affected by this? I mean, you've got a tenancy that you've secured.
Yeah.
How do you see it playing out?
Well, it's a bit of a weird one for me because obviously I don't have any family land in this country, and luckily the land Dad has in Kenya, the president of Kenya hopefully has not listened to these lot, and he doesn't bring that in because Dad's looking to transfer that to my name and my sister in the near future. But I think that the angle I'm looking at it from is, as Mark said on the end there, about the business side, because it's not a shock that a lot of farming businesses have been on a tightrope for a long time. So I think now the IHT is coming, it's almost like a nail in the coffin, but then the industry had already been in a coffin before. So why are we not trying to look around at how can we make our businesses viable without relying on BPS, which I've never had a chance to enjoy. Council stewardship scheme, I couldn't get on that, and I've recently got on SFI, and I'd rather do 3 hog roasts instead of the amount of money I get in a year. I might as well do 3 hog roasts, which I enjoy, rather than following a stipulated list of things to do to get coins. So my perspective, and I know a lot of people, because it's quite an emotive subject, a lot of people probably will disagree with me, but I think if you've got a viable business and it's working and on all sorts, you wouldn't really be panicking about cost because other businesses have to pay some of these taxes. So I think we'd probably need to push at having our businesses viable rather than, let's say, having a load of tractors kicking up about IHT. Why don't we have that for supply chain fairness? Because I didn't see that many people doing that. I was at a Tesco depot in Southampton in a truck on my own with our baby in hospital, blocking up their entrance for sort of 3 hours. No other farmer turned up. I don't supply supermarkets. But I think there are things we need to nail to make the industry go farther for younger people than me coming through, rather than worrying about things that are never going to change. Or not never, but I don't think they're going to change.
Thank you, Flavian. I'm going to come back to you in a minute, James, but I wanted to ask, Amy, this is a sort of a communications issue. The vast majority, almost unanimous, people saying, "Well, we don't think the government is going to change." Do you think the government is going to soften its stance on inheritance tax at all? And do you have any sort of hints and tips for us to get that message across? Are we fighting a losing battle?
I have to say my tip is to move on, quite frankly, because what worries me now is I think the message has been quite categorical. So what do we have to gain from continuing to protest or take direct action? Because there has been talk about stepping it up. And I just think, the public is largely on farmers' sides on a lot of things, but there are a number who look at when they live as single parents in council tower blocks, wonder why there is an issue with living in a detached house in the countryside. I think there's a relatability issue, and I worry that when people start being unable to get to where they want to go, they stop being able to get the food they want, and this steps up, I think we will lose support, and I think that is a really, really dangerous thing to do. I deal with reputation of the industry, and we need to be building bridges with the public and to get them to feel they support what we do. So I would say, exactly as Flavian said before, and in fact Steve Reed said this at the Oxford Farming Conference, it might be the straw that's breaking the camel's back, but there are loads of straws breaking a camel's back. Why is that breaking? It's because of this systemic lack of profitability in the industry. So I think we should be focusing on that and build our capital with the public and build our reputation and just basically park the protest side of things, because I think this is now diminishing returns territory.
Thank you very much. James?
Just very quickly, Flavian really reminded me of the small farmers accessing schemes is an issue, a really big issue. We talk about these various schemes that are available to farms, and and the government often says, well, there's this and this that you can access to, but actually smaller farms find it very difficult to access these schemes. They don't actually do them any good at the end of the day, and you find people saying, just so you are, it'd be easier for me to do something else than it is to actually access some of the schemes. And the other thing I was going to say was just, Amy picked up on it. I think from the public's perception, I don't think they necessarily see how much farmers have been through in recent, how many blows in a row this has been. This is the latest, as you say, straw that breaks the camel's back, or the latest blow in a series. You know, the Australia trade deal kind of passed the public by. They don't know how damaging that potentially is to British farming. They don't know how much underspent DEFRA's budget has been in recent years, and they don't know how marginal the farming industry is, or indeed loss-making in many cases, and how many farmers do it as more of a labour of love than anything that's ever going to make them any money. So I think there is a real disconnect here between the way it's perceived and the reality that perhaps people in this room and watching are seeing in their day-to-day lives as farmers.
Thank you. Would anybody from the audience like to make a point at all? Yes, gentlemen, just wait for the microphone, just say who you are, where you're from.
Yeah, I think I have some French farming relations, and all I know is they would approach this in a very different way. And I think the trouble is farmers are too nice. To be honest, if you look at Bob Crow, he's done really well. And so I sort of think the problem is, and until there is some downside at the moment, there isn't a downside politically. So that would be my only comment.
So when you say so French farmers would take a different approach, do you mean sort of more direct action?
Yes.
And what form do you think that should take?
I don't know what it would be. I think that the problem at the moment is, from the government's point of view, people turning up and being nice. There's no problem at all. I think the one thing that the government have done, which is probably unwise, is because of the sweeping nature of it, they've included all farmers, and the politically positive people who people can relate to are those like the Welsh farmers, Cornish farmers, Scottish farmers. And I always remember there was a chap called Haddock who used to run Farmers for Action, and he was pretty cute, and he always said he was only interviewed in his kitchen in his boiler suit. And he insisted on that, and basically getting the image across of people who work incredibly hard, earn very little, and to try and get the public on side. And at the moment, the government have effectively got they're the ones making the running. And the good thing is, it's not just the Duke of Westminster who's in there. So if I was the government, I'd actually try and take the smaller ones out. Personally, I'd do something to get them out of it, and then you can do what you want.
Thank you. Adrian, next to you, what do you think? Do you think the government's going to soften its stance at all, or do you think, as has been sort of intimated, we might be fighting a little bit of a losing battle here?
If you'd asked me at the beginning of the week, I would have said I still think there's a strong chance. I don't think they'll U-turn, but I think there would have been a strong chance of some changes to what's been proposed. After Tuesday, if my cup was 3/4 full, it's now only a quarter full. I'm interested in the comments about profitability, because that is absolutely at the heart of this. And the reason we've got an issue is we've got valuable assets and low profitability. The difficulty, of course, is that you've got units, small family units, that are only marginally profitable, but because of the value of the assets, from the work I've done, are looking at sizable IHT liabilities, and in some cases we're talking £500,000 plus. Now, you can talk about paying that over 10 years, but if your profitability is only 12 or 15,000, then actually that's never ever going to happen. So we are going to see units being broken up. Now, I entirely agree. It would be lovely to sit here in a world where, you know, farms were profitable. We weren't worrying so much about subsidies and schemes because, you know, food prices were such that farmers could make a fair living. The reality is that's not where we are. And if this does go through in the form that it's looking likely it's going to go through, I think we've got the law of unintended consequences, where the big landowners that the government are looking to affect actually probably will be able to live with this. The small units, as Robin said, down in the West Country or in Wales or up in the hills in the north, I think it could be a very, very different story.
May I offer just a piece of advice, which to the farmers in the room, and it's the piece of advice that came out of the conversation last night, was you just touched on it in terms of the legislation, and there'll be a consultation, I believe, in June, I think it is. The best advice that I heard last night, I didn't give it, so I can't take credit for it, was wait. Just wait, because the nature of the legislation will go through a consultation, it will go through Parliament, and no doubt the Liberal Democrats and Conservatives and all the other parties will have a view on it, right? Let's just see what it looks like, and that is also the opportunity to request or affect change through your MPs and through the relevant all parliamentary policy groups, sorry, I'll try not to do acronyms, APPGs, and see where we can de-blunt the instrument, for want of a better phrase. And I think that's the opportunity. And people are getting worried, and I know there's been some really unfortunate unintended consequences. Some people are no longer here as a result of this, and it's, pretty serious stuff, right? So just, I think, hold your nerve just for a couple of months and let this play out a little bit. And I think someone gave that advice last night, and it was really, really sensible view of just wait, right? Let's just see what they do next.
Johan, could I?
Yes,
I just want to add another dimension to this as well, and it's the conversation about the ability to have a discussion about succession. And I think that's certainly from my own perspective with my father and my two brothers, the ability to, it was never an elephant in the room in our family. We did talk about it, we just never did anything about it because Dad still held on to it. And I think, what this has done is opened up that conversation. I saw a fantastic graph the other day while I was on an estate, and it showed that actually without succession, the viability of businesses does decrease over time. But when you bring succession into the business, whilst it drops while that handover takes place, that business then continues to increase. And I think there is a conversation there to be had about this has started that round the table with family, with those that need to be in the room conversation, and that has to be a good thing for our industry.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. Discover Kubota's M7004 series, which celebrates a decade of exceptional innovation in Kubota's flagship tractor lineup. The new M7004 features a 6.1-litre, 4-cylinder Kubota engine with up to 175 horsepower and offers a choice of power shift or updated KVT transmission. It is equipped with advanced auto guidance, smart farming technologies, and TIM, Kubota's tractor implement management for semi-autonomous operations. Key updates enhance operator convenience, including the ability to set cruise control speed without moving, an automatic assisted parking brake, and an improved K-monitor for expanded functionality. For more information about the new M7004 series, visit www.kubota.co.uk or contact your local Kubota dealer today. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
I'm going to move it on. I mean, I think we're probably going to touch on this again in the next question, but it is a different question. It's something that James actually said earlier, hasn't been spoken about enough. But Josh Brock, could you ask your question, please? Say who you are away from.
I'm Josh Brock, as you just did, thank you. I work for ADAS as an agri-business consultant, and my question this evening is, how do you think farm businesses can overcome the loss of BPS?
So how do you think farm businesses can overcome the loss of BPS? Flavian's already said that he doesn't get BPS, but I am going to ask Kelly, how do farmers overcome the loss of the basic payment?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to start off with, isn't there? And I think historically BPS has played a big role in farm business accounts. I think the stats show that it's 60 to 80% of income in farm business accounts. We've just heard from Flav actually that, without BPS, what can be achieved. So I think, having BPS has maybe undermined our businesses, has it, I guess a question back, has it stifled, progression of our businesses? Have we become complacent because we've got BPS, and it's reliable income? I think the other element is that we are going through this transition, and so we have had warning that this would decrease over a 7-year period, albeit that we have had the acceleration of the de-linked payments in 2025, which came out of the blue. But we have had that sort of notice period to look at how do we overcome that loss. We did a blog last year and we had sort of, 5 points. The first one was looking at efficiencies, looking at where costs can be reduced, and looking at innovation, where can innovation be brought into the business. The second point was about value adding, and I think there's a big conversation here, and I'm sure it will take a week rather than an hour, about food, about the broken food system, about what that looks like for the future, about how we all play a part. Market strategies, working with supply chains, working with retailers, what does that look like for the future? The third one is diversification, and many businesses have diversified over the years, and it's not for everybody. But the fourth and the fifth, I think, are the two important. Where does funding come from for the future? So looking at public funding and private funding. So looking at those public outlets that you mentioned, SFI, the ELM schemes, are there other public monies coming through, whether that be grant funding opportunities, but private money. So looking at where we can actually get closer to those in the supply chain. What does that look like? BNG, we've heard those acronyms. What does that look like? How can we stack and sequence and bundle the opportunities within our business? And I guess a big question is, do we have the skills within our businesses to do that for the future?
Thank you. Flavian, you're living proof, as it were, that you can survive and run a successful business without the basic payment scheme. Tell us how you're managing to run your business without something like the BPS.
I think you got 20, well, I know this is probably not a good way to say it, but you got 24 hours in a day. You want to get as much out of it as possible sustainably. Sometimes I've done it in a way that's not sustainable, like doing 21-hour days, which is probably not handy when you've got a small family. But I think where I've got a tenancy and it's got an expiry date, it's 7 to 10 years max. And after 5 years, I've got to start looking at an exit plan. Luckily, I've got a plan B, which is Kenya. So I know I've always got something back home. But I think having that in your mind constantly, as opposed to if it was a family farm, I know it's there, it's not going anywhere, it just keeps you on your toes a little bit. So when I get asked, what do you do on your farm? I joke and say anything that makes money, and I mean it. Because if, like the catering, the butchery, the selling pork direct to customers, and a point someone made about getting farming in with the public, I find as an industry, we tend to take along amongst ourselves with the agricultural events, and people call them echo chambers. And when things hit the fan, we then suddenly seek support from the public, who have always been buying our product the whole time. And you think, why, as a public, because I've not always been a farmer, I always revert back to that mentality of, if I'm a member of the public, how would I think of this? Why would I support someone that's never looked at me like anyone the other time? You wouldn't. So I think it's that thing of the industry needs to have the public on our side all the time, literally all the time. And I've found that moving to a new area, sometimes our pigs have got out on the road or got into people's gardens. And that's helped the business in the sense of people now know there's a farm. And I've done a pop-up shop now four weekends in a row. And it's unbelievable. There's queues on the road, people coming in to see us. And they didn't know, we've been there nearly 2 years now, they didn't know we existed. And now, if anything happens, oh, the farmer's not there, can someone go and help him? And you're slowly getting into the community. Schools want to bring their kids to come and have a look. So I think we need to stop using the public when we need them, because without the public, we're screwed.
So we've spoken about the unintended consequences of inheritance tax. You're saying that there are actually unintended benefits of escaped livestock, that they can actually bring you closer to the customer, but perhaps not in the way that you intended. Yeah. You also, Mark was emphasising earlier on the importance of taking a business approach to what you do. You're very business focused. You're very customer focused, rather than, as you say, going to the government or looking for public support to help you get. You're delivering what the public wants.
Yeah, and I think because I've always been employed up until we got this farm, I've always seen how my employers have tried to do things with the government. Sorry, James. And things haven't gone their way. So I'm like, I've got 7 years here. Why should I constantly try and lobby when I can just put my head down, slog for the 7 years? If it works, it does. If it doesn't, pay my debts and go do something else. Because if it doesn't work after 7 years, I'm not going to try again. I'll just do something else.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Mark and James in a minute, but Amy, a lot of what Flavian seems to be saying is that the industry, we should try and see ourselves a little bit more as the public sees us, rather than as we think that we should be seen. He's talking about delivering what the public want. That's an important thing. Yeah?
It's what every other business has to do in this country, and I think, again, it's really hard because, look, I'm not a farmer myself. I've always been involved in farming, so I absolutely sympathise with the enormous amount of change that's going on at the moment. But looking at it through the eyes of the public and looking at the reputation of the industry, I just think, we need to respond and we need to look at those opportunities and we need to be like every other businesses in this country and adapt. And actually, isn't losing BPS an opportunity to, liberate what we're doing? Look at New Zealand. Is it our New Zealand moment to actually start to do things differently? And, we know leaving Europe has in some ways been an enormous difficulty, an enormous challenge, but also that moves very slowly. There's been a big rollout this week of their new policy, and we know that the last one was dogged by lots of difficulties. So actually, can we be more agile? Can we make the most of these opportunities? And I find it amazing that as many people as I speak to who feel very negative and upset and despondent about the future of the industry, there are some people who feel incredibly passionate and enthused and optimistic. So why is there that difference? And as far as BPS is concerned, I've always just thought it's just a subsidy for cheap food. Do farmers ever see any of the benefit of BPS? Because all I see it does is it keeps the price of food down.
Thanks, Amy Jackson. Thank you, Mark Lumsden-Taylor. Just to go back to the sort of the original question, as it were, how do you think farm businesses can overcome the loss of the basic payment scheme?
I agree with your point that BPS was effectively a subsidy. I can't remember the exact percentage about the industry voting and not voting for leaving the EU, but you kind of knew this, where those that voted for it knew this was going to come. They were going to phase this out. Whatever the government may or may not have said about, we're going to give you more money, it wasn't going to happen. I think for businesses, there are two things that make the world go round: how much and who's doing it. And I have sat with so many farming businesses and industry leads and everything else over the last sort of 15 years. And we've talked about recruitment, skills and all of that. And those that are forward-sighted have gone, yeah, okay, we need to invest. We need to take a few risks, irrespective of what government policy is going to be, and we'll try and forward plan our business. People is fundamental to the business. Whether you're trading them through places like this or you're doing it in-house, you need to have those quality people that can do the job in your organisation, point number one. Point number two is there is economies of scale. We've seen huge consolidation in numerous industries, not just agriculture, food and farming. Whether we like it or not, things are getting bigger. And people are becoming either niche specialists, whether you're a chili grower that's got a complete market capture of just making fantastic chilies, or wine in Kent is a great example of that. The generalists are invariably having to consolidate and merge. And that is a fact. And I know my colleague over there from the accountancy world is nodding. That's what we need to accept. But I see that as an opportunity as well, because those businesses consolidating into something bigger is going to create more jobs, create more efficiencies, economies of scale, and actually perhaps even do better for the common market in terms of what the price of food is. So I think that's the way to do it. There will always be schemes. There will always be opportunities for grants, and all of those agricultural consultants you see at events in Tweed will always be there trying to, being provocative, trying to sell you something or advise you on consultancy of some form or another. But that's always going to be there. Every government will offer some forms of schemes. The strategy's got to be, where do you want your organisation to be in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And if it is effectively consolidation, then embrace it, because there are huge opportunities. I've seen some incredible businesses over the last sort of 15 years start fairly small, grow, develop, take a few, and you must take risks, into these multi-million pound corporates now that have swallowed up other farms, but that's worked for them. So I think you have to look at it from a different lens, and I entirely agree with your comment about PR and media. I think we've got to flip it on its head, look at it as an opportunity. Why is aviation doing so well in this country? I'm multi-sectoral. Because they've got their language right, and they're talking up the importance of a third runway at Heathrow. They're talking up the importance of the UK being a hub, and government's listening. Got to change the narrative.
Can I just add one thing to that? I think that's a great point, and I think we've actually had the signals from government. Now, I know there maybe feels like they're flip-flopping a bit, but the talk about co-design, the talk about needing solutions, is this not an opportunity to bring solutions to government and force them to respond to them?
Yeah. And if you give them that, give them an in save their political bacon, forgive me, MP in the middle, save their political bacon and give them a narrative, and that's what organisations like CBI do really well, and then they win and we win. And do not underestimate, and I know we're in education, the power of the next generation. So the power of that training in the next level. I know Kelly mentioned about succession. I completely agree with that point. That has been elevated as a result of this debate. And I think that's about bloody time. The amount of times I've talked to farmers about this and they're going, no, it'll be all right. Absolutely right now. So I think embrace the bloody opportunity. Excuse my language. You can edit that out.
Mark, thank you. I think what Mark seems to be saying is go to government with solutions to the problems that the government has, rather than go to the government with your own problems. But
accept the changes.
James, how do you think farm businesses can overcome the loss of the basic payment scheme?
We've spoken about it a little bit. I mean, I will very respectfully and mildly digress from some of my colleagues here and just suggest that the problem with just accepting change, if it is negative for an industry, is that governments tend to just do more things because they don't see any opposition. The problem we have here is I have a real fundamental issue with the term farm subsidy, or the idea that these things are subsidies at all. I see them as investments in food producers. I see public money for public good as being a fundamental principle of government. And we have a duty as a government, I'm not in the government, but our government has a duty, in my view, to secure and support the future of farming. Now, what you're talking about is right. I mean, obviously we have to invest in the future. Places like Plumpton College are critical to that. Diversification of farm businesses. I see it here in my constituency. We have some fantastic farm businesses who've got breweries on site, who've made huge use of the visitor industry. You can go up to a big visitor farm just by Ditchling if you want, or come down and see Middle Farm, which is another one that's diversified into visitors. We've got lots of glamping sites locally. If you want to come and do some glamping, we have a great range of them, and I can recommend a few to you. So we've seen farmers investing in that, but a lot of the time they're larger farms who have the capital to do these sorts of investments. And what I have to say is I'm hearing, a lot of people talking about, consolidation. This is an opportunity for us to potentially get into bigger units. What is the future of the small family farm here? And this is what I think is dangerous for the future, is that we've seen other countries, America, Australia, where we have these enormous farms, and the devastating effect that has on things like animal welfare standards, for instance, in factory farming, where we see huge amounts produced at very low costs, a very effective business model. If you can reduce your costs, you'll increase your profit. But the output is of a very low standard compared to what we have in this country, which means that, we've seen, fears of chlorine-washed chicken coming in from America and things, which is unthinkable in this country. So what I'm saying is that I think that there is a role for government to provide public money to support the farming industry. I don't see it as just a subsidy. I certainly, there may well be farmers out there who've become, complacent about these things, but my experience of most farmers is they are always looking for opportunities to make profits, particularly if it's a family business, because this is their family's future. And so the BPS tapering, I think, is really damaging. And the final thing I say on this is, obviously BPS was part of the Common Agricultural Policy when we were in the European Union. The Common Agricultural Policy, which for me was the only potential upside of Brexit, was we were going to get out of the CAP, which we've somehow even managed to screw that up. The rest of it has been enormously damaging to this country. But people only think in those terms. Farmers have also lost access to the single market. They've lost access to the customs union. And these things have made export industries in particular much, much harder. And we see all the time talk of huge delays at our ports trying to get fresh produce out of the country, ending up sitting there due to customs delays. And I think alongside a lot of this other stuff we talk about with payments to farmers having to look at their business models, is also the government saying, look, we're going to make it easier for farmers to make a profit by giving them better access to our largest market, which is on our doorstep, which we lost when we left the European Union. So there are quite a few elements to this, but at the basic level, I always slightly balk at people sort of suggesting that farming is something that's become complacent and lazy because they've become used to subsidies. I actually don't see it that way. And I think it's really important that the government continues to support our food-producing industry for the future, because we've seen in an unstable world, we've seen with the Americans imposing tariffs, we've seen with Russia invading Ukraine, how unstable the world is, and it's important that we secure our own food supply.
Thank you. Kelly, you wanted to come back on
it was just a positive challenge to you there, James. You mentioned public money for public goods. Food isn't seen and recognised as a public good.
Yep, I mean, and I think that partly speaks to the point made earlier about access to farms as well. I mean, I was talking to farmers near here actually not very long ago about this. Farmers are quite hidden. It's strange because if you drive around here, you will mostly be driving through farmland. And so it's all around you. And yet people don't feel very connected to it. They don't know what farms do or what that land is for. And I think part of that is that connection. And I think also there's something around. Flavia made this point too. I'm not just repeating everything you're saying to make myself look good. The point about supermarkets is really important. People get their food from a supermarket and they don't think about how it got to the supermarket, right? Almost like it was produced in the supermarket somehow. And I think that we need also to have a proper discussion about that. You spoke about BPS being used as a subsidy for food prices. This is a challenge I give to everybody all the time because it was given to me by one of our farmers locally here. You know, Liberal Democrats in our manifesto, we spoke about bringing down food prices. We're in a cost of living crisis. My ward in Newhaven is one of the most deprived areas in the southeast of England. I meet people all the time who are using food banks. They can barely afford to feed their children. Yet farmers need a better price for their produce, which means you need higher prices for food. So somewhere in between these two things, there is a sweet spot, and I just don't think we have it in this country. You can't supply very cheap food, which we need because people can't afford to feed their families, and also support farmers. So we've got to look at that whole supply chain, in my view, and look at the grocery adjudication thing, whatever it's called. That's a flawed system. It was introduced by Liberal Democrats in government, but it's a flawed system, and we've got to do better at looking down the supply chain to farms and making sure they're getting fair prices. But also, you do have to make sure that my constituents can actually afford to buy food.
James, do you mind? Sorry to interrupt you very quickly, because you just mentioned my kind of absolute bugbear. And this isn't a pun. I'm the founder of the Rural Policy Group, and what you just explained there is exactly what this organisation has been doing for the last 5 years. It takes a county, so we did Kent, we've done Lincolnshire, and we've done Surrey, and it looks at the value of that county as if it was a listed PLC, and we compare it. So, for example, Kent was the same size as Sainsbury's. Lincolnshire's the same size as Associated British Foods, the largest food business in the United Kingdom. And when you put it into that times of financial rhetoric, people get it. So, oh Christ, that's quite a big business. You see the size of Sainsbury's and Tesco's. It's everywhere, right? These are corporate businesses. But within the analysis, we look at what are the barriers to the upstream and the downstream of the chain, because that's ultimately what affects the farmers in this room, is what margin do you get and how is that controlled, right? So we've been working on this for the last 4 to 5 years. Various MPs, Daniel Zeitner has been heavily involved. And if we can get more MPs to sort of buy into what's already there, and it is empirical evidence, you might be able to start to affect some change here. And you guys might, with respect, might be able to start to use that in Parliament. And listen, and my charge to the farmers and the partners in here is, we're very good at moaning about stuff, but get behind stuff that actually is positive, because there's a great story to tell. And that's what organisations like, I can't take full credit for it because it's being run independently now, but use those sorts of projects and play it into Westminster and then have a row with the civil servants.
I don't agree with you, but very last point.
I apologise.
You talk about, you're right, and you should lean into it, but Elms, for instance, is a good example of this. It's a good idea, right? Better, in my view, than the previous scheme.
Agreed.
Where is it? Farmers said, great, okay, let's do Elms, that's great. And it's just taken so long to roll out, and they've done it so poorly that farmers have suffered enormously. And I think that's where a lot of the cynicism comes from. Here's a good idea, politicians think this is a good idea, great, okay, let's do that then. And it never happens, and farmers end up suffering. And I think that sort of thing is where a lot of the cynicism comes from.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
At Savills, we understand firsthand what the rural sector is going through during this period of seismic change.
Whether you're managing a multi-generational change, wanting valuations for your property and assets, or needing some practical guidance on land use and balancing farming with the developing opportunities, Savills is here to help. Additionally, our research team provides a wide range of useful and freely available information which you can access by visiting the Savills Rural Knowledge Portal.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
This evening, as well as Savills, one of our sponsors that's made this evening possible is Lantra. Lantra supports farmers in the agricultural sector by providing high-quality industry-recognised training and qualifications. And I'm going to give Andrew Palmer from Lantra the opportunity to ask a question of the panel.
Thank you, Johan. Andrew Palmer, Head of Agriculture at Lantra. Just to shift the rhetoric a little bit, trying to get a little bit, we have so much agri-tech and technology in farming nowadays. How can we better showcase that to new entrants and get new entrants into farming?
So how can we better showcase agri-tech and get new entrants into farming? Flavian, I'm going to come to you on this one. How do we do that? Is there a way of showcasing agri-tech and encouraging youngsters into farming?
It would depend what stage you want to introduce it to them, because you mentioned tech. Most young people now, me included, spend a lot of time online for all sorts of reasons. And I think when you look at the industry, we're getting there slowly, but we don't utilize social media or online as much as other industries do. And I think that's somewhere where, let's say, for example, like TikTok, I know Trump banned it for, 24 hours or something, but something like that, you've got young people on there all the time. And if a lot of the time you hear the negatives of social media, but there's so many positives. Like yesterday, I was sending a message to a Hartbury student I've never met before, just sent me a message saying, I'm thinking of having pigs after my degree. What advice have you got? I mean, suddenly talking about rations or whatever. I've never met this kid. And he just sent me a message via social media asking me about rationing. He doesn't have to go to a feed company to then go down the official route. He could just message me because I'm quite accessible and talk about it that way. How the interaction goes could determine whether he goes on and does the pigs or not. So I think in the point I made earlier about the industry being accessible to people, I think we need to tap into the online sort of sphere to showcase what we're doing, whether it's robotics or sort of even data recording, because that's not really seen as tech, but it is tech, in my opinion.
Andrew, what's Lantra doing to encourage youngsters into the industry through agri-tech, for example?
And we're doing a lot of work at the moment with schools and careers. We're doing a lot of work at careers fairs, etc. The agri-tech one is a new area I'm going to look into, and I'm going to look with the agri-tech people to see they're showcasing all this agri-tech. Well, I want to try and follow up, or we want to try and follow up. How do we get the skills to follow that journey? And I'm not. I'm quite open to looking over the seas, see if there's other industries, other countries that do it better. I was very fortunate years ago to go to Australia and things like that. They showcase agriculture, and we've already had the rhetoric in regards to the lack of support UK agriculture gets, sort of thing. But there's a journey there. There is a lot of agri-tech there. Last year I was with Farmers Week at the New Scientist Live with new tech there. And the audience there were absolutely blown away with the tech, absolutely blown away. And that's what we need to do more of.
Thank you. Kelly Hewson-Fisher, we are a far more techie industry than many people give us credit for. Even people within the industry probably don't give farming the credit that it deserves when it comes to technology. We sort of seem to have sometimes this reputation of being laggards, but farming is a lot more high-tech than people think.
Yeah, it is. And there's some fantastic opportunities. And I think we just need to shout louder. We need to shout louder about what this industry is. And going forward, we need all those different skill sets. You know, land is absolutely vital to the government to meet a range of objectives, whether that's food production, environmental protection and recovery, reaching their goals on a decarbonised power sector. We're going to need all of these skill sets within our industry to make it viable going forward. And we need to showcase that all of those skills are important. You know, we don't have them all. Farmers being able to produce food, but we're going to need all of the different skill sets. So for me, I'm just so optimistic about the sector going forward. And we just all need to shout louder about the opportunities. It's great going to careers fairs, but it's making sure that all of those careers advisors have that information to hand. Certainly when I was at school, and I know it's a few years ago now, but when I was at school, there were no opportunities presented to me to go into the agricultural sector. I had no idea that this role existed as head of rural research for Savills. And it's a great opportunity. I get to stay within that rural sector that I am so passionate about. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to take responsibility and to shout about our sector and the opportunities within it.
A point to add to Kelly there. Also, I think it's where we're looking for the people we want to attract. Because if we're just constantly going to be going to Plumpton or Harper or Hartbury, then we're just going to be getting the same people. So if we're talking about tech, why are we not looking at IT unis? Why are we not looking at accounting unis? Because we need accountants in agriculture. They don't have to have come from a family where dad had 1,000 acres. Any accountant can do maths. So you can get an accountant from any uni, economics and so on. So we definitely need to widen our net. And in the years I've been in farming, since starting in 2010, the net is still tiny. We're still looking blinkered all the time, just relying on a handful of sort of sources of people coming to the industry rather than looking a bit wider.
Amy Jackson, and I'm going to, could we get a microphone to Jeremy as well? But Amy, a lot of thoughts there from Flavian, from Kelly, and indeed Andrew.
They're really good thoughts. I think the bigger problem is we have a massive brand problem with UK farming, and unless we actually deal with that brand image, we're not going to pull the people we want into the industry. So I think we need to deal with the brand problem. I remember I was doing a survey with the RABDF many years ago, just as we were Brexiting, and it was about trying to show that we needed access to overseas labour on a permanent basis. And we did a survey of people to talk about the dairy industry. Would you be interested in working in the dairy industry? There's such low interest amongst British citizens in working in farming. It's unbelievable. So I think we need to sort out the brand problem. And how do you do that? Well, we need to all work as an industry and work out how we fund it, and we have a focus on it. Interestingly, about 12 years ago, UK engineering recognised it didn't have enough women coming through into the STEM industries, and it had a massive focus on that and has had huge uplift in women coming into the industry. It's not going to happen overnight, but unless we work as an industry together and pool our resources and actually solve this problem by putting the money and the resources in, we're not going to move the dial, because as ever in farming, we're all acting in our little silos and doing our own little bits of work. Canning College did a fantastic advertising series challenging people's preconceptions of the type of people that work in agriculture. But that's just one college. We need to do this as an industry, and we need to put proper funding in.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. The reason I asked the microphone to go to Jeremy Kurzweil, Principal of Plumpton College, is because we were talking before this, and you were saying that actually we talk a lot about need to get more people into the industry, but you've got more students here studying agriculture or more interested than ever before.
Yeah, thank you very much. Itching to get into this part of the conversation, as you could tell. I think there are probably 3 or 4 things that I would pick that we've done here over the last 8 or 9 years, actually, that are having a huge impact on not just the volume of students that we're attracting, but the backgrounds of those students that are coming to us now. The first of those would be facilities and our own investment in tech, our responsibility to be showcasing, if you like, some of the modern advances that exist out there. We're, as is testament for the building we're in this evening, we're just coming to the end of a £25 million investment in our resources here at Plumpton. And that's about, clear business plan, clear strategy and finding a way. There's some commonality there with other businesses, aren't there, and other conversations this evening. But yeah, huge investment in facilities, very much agriculture is very much part of that. So a big investment on our farm in terms of our RSPCA assured pig unit, which Flav helped design a few years ago, robots on our dairy, but continually looking at ways in which we can invest, hopefully, the UK's first smart vineyard coming to Plumpton at some point in the next 18 months as well. So that's the first thing, I think, investment in facilities, showcasing what that tech does. Secondly, and it builds on conversations already had tonight, it's about story. And I think, we have a responsibility here to take a different narrative out there into the wider kind of audience, really. That's not just schools, it's parents, it's families, it's communities. And we've totally turned on its head, I think, that story that we take out, particularly into schools. We work with about 200 schools here at Plumpton. And tell a very different story. One of, actually, these are all the reasons why you should get into this wonderful food and farming sector that's all about science, it's all about innovation, that's about enterprise and opportunity, etc. Thirdly, it would be partnership. I can't afford to spend another £25 million in the next few years, and it's quite difficult to keep up, I think, with some of those technological advances. And the only way, therefore, that we can continue to expose our students to those latest advances is by working in partnership with others. And Crawford's are a really good example of a machinery dealership that we've worked with recently to provide over £1 million worth of the latest state-of-the-art tractors and GPS equipment for our students on an annual basis. And finally, I think it's about spaces like this, and spaces like this were built to bring audiences together, to showcase, to share a story, and to build partnerships. And that's not only for events like this evening, but next month or later this academic year, we're hosting 300 secondary school teachers in this space. They will all walk out of here with a very different impression of the land-based sector, the careers in the land-based sector, and will be telling a different story to their pupils moving forwards.
Can I just start? I think this is fantastic. How do we do that across the whole country?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think Landex are a land-based college member organisation. I think there are examples of other colleges that are doing just this, but equally there are opportunities to do more. I didn't get to my impact point, actually, just to finish off on that. As a result of all of that, we've seen a doubling in agriculture student numbers in the last 3 years alone. So much so, actually, it's causing us capacity issues. And as I said, it's not just attracting more, but they're studying at a higher level than ever before. And all the feedback we hear on a local, regional, national basis is that the sector, not just farming, but food and farming more widely, rural land management more widely, needs people trained at level 3, 4, 5 and 6. This is about, industry game changers of the future, and therefore this is about A-level equivalent and degree level study.
Chair, can I just respond to Jeremy, because I think you, and you as well, about how do you, if you like, well, not just monetize it, but nationalise what you've just said. It's incumbent upon businesses like the one I work in, which is a global company, to work with educational providers to provide those pathways. So we take, 250 entrance graduates every year, and they're not just business degree people. I've got people that work in environmental science, agricultural qualifications at BSc and BA level, and not just necessarily level 7 or level 6, but level 3, level 4. Businesses, I think, we're not very good at it. We never have been. And I remember sitting in Jeremy's seat where we used to try and get people to engage with that. And I think it links into just very quickly, the point about how do we promote the industry. And I'm just using aviation because I spend quite a bit of time in it at the minute. Farnborough Airport, not a million miles away from here, right? They host the World Expo in aviation, in defence technology every year, and everybody all over the world comes to it, right? There's all the MPs, the ministers, lots of different people come to it. Do we do that for agriculture, food and farming in this country? Bearing in mind we actually created quite a lot of the original stuff 100 years ago. We do not. But we're very good at telling ourselves stuff, but not very good at telling it to other people outside of the industry. And I think that's where it can need a reset. And I think that's where government can also help. Government are so behind the Farnborough project. And, you know, I do a lot of work in aviation industry. And the final point, ESG. Jeremy, this place, and you know, sustainability is one of your founding elements. It's the cool stuff, isn't it, at the minute? If I had a pound for every time I see a new consultant ring me, I wouldn't have to work. It's just awash with consultants. But my point is, environmental social governance is cool, it's fun, it's quite sexy, and kids now, when they come to us, they say, well, what are you doing around the environment? And if we go, nothing, well, they'll go and work at PwC, or they'll go and find another place to work. And I think that's really incumbent, again. We haven't talked about it tonight. We could do a whole session on that. So just to make those points.
I'm gonna move it on to another question. We've probably got time for maybe this question and hopefully one more afterwards if we're quick on this one. Tom Gribble.
Thank you. Tom Gribble, yeah, dairy farmer, sheep, beef and arable from about 5 or 6 miles away from here. My question is, I've got loads I could say, but I'll stick to the question. If there is a budget available for agricultural-related infrastructure in the southeast, what would be your priority and why?
Thank you very much. Thanks, Tom. I've just been told we've got 10 minutes, so if we do this one quite quickly, but give it what it deserves, we can do the last question. And the last question is quite a good one as well. So I'm going to start with Mark. So Tom's saying, if there was a budget available for agricultural-related infrastructure in the southeast, what would be your priority and why? And I doubt we have Jeremy's £25 million either.
I could be super quick on this.
Yes, please.
Digitisation and broadband. That's the future of technology. That's the future of farming and agriculture and food. And you need fast connections. I cannot tell you the annoyance I had trying to actually make a phone call from the M25 down here. It drives me mad. Simple as that. That's what we need.
Thank you. I'm going to go down the table, and I know Flavian has probably got to go at some point, but okay, you're all right. Yeah, okay. Kelly, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Flavian.
Yeah, for me, it would be water. So in the southeast, I would see that we've got huge potential across the southeast to look at, you know, we're 54% self-sufficient in veg, we're 17% or so self-sufficient in fruit. We've got huge opportunities potentially there across that southeast where you've got the climate, you've got the soils, but water is a huge concern going forward, water scarcity in particular. If we do nothing between now and 2050, we're going to need 5 billion litres per day of water. And that's really driven by population growth, climate change, environmental destination. And I know the Environment Agency are now looking at abstraction licences across the country, looking at where it has an impact, abstraction has an impact on the environment. So for me, looking at where we can support water infrastructure across that southeast to increase productivity would be mine.
Thank you. Flavian? As a livestock farmer like Tom, abattoirs. Like we just had Turner's shut in Farnborough. I'm in Fareham. I go to Chippenham. I remember being in Farnborough. I used to go 3 times a week to Farnborough. There's a lady brought 1 lamb from Hastings and she'd had to come back and pick it up. I know she's probably doing it for her freezer, but if that's a small business, in fuel, you're done. You haven't even paid for the animal to be killed. And I think I'm quite a simple person in the sense of farming. You feed an animal, it grows. It's just pretty straightforward. So we talk about net zero, carbon, all these things, big words we're using. How can we get to net zero when I'm feeding the animals grain growing 3 miles away? I'm doing all I can to have low carbon footprint. I don't have a tractor. I use everything on my truck. Then I've got to do 60 miles to Chippenham. Then a lorry has to come back and bring it back to me. And then we say we've got the best welfare in the world. It doesn't add up to me. So we need at least 2 or 3 in the southeast.
Thank you. Thanks, Flavian. James.
Yeah, I was hoping someone would mention the abattoir point because it's really important that we have so few local abattoirs now. It's absolutely awful, and the climate change impact is substantial. I would say the same as Mark, to be honest. That was, I mean, in my kind of inbox as an MP with not just agriculture, but rural communities generally, that digital connectivity is a massive limiting growth factor. 5G, high-speed broadband, which allows digitization to happen, you can't do it. I mean, in terms of business growth, if you can't access digital services reliably, then it is an enormous restricting factor on any modern business. And we're increasingly see growth of AI in industry. And I was, on the last point, AI is going to be important to the farming industry, as it is to every industry, and how we harness that is important. But you won't be able to if you can't access reliable, high-speed connectivity to the digital realm. So for me, that would be the top one. And I just very quickly on the water point, water is huge for the South East. We have both a scarcity problem, as you mentioned in the introduction. We have an issue with our water company using our public waterways as an open sewer. And we also have question marks around flooding and mitigating flood impacts. And some of our farmers in some of the valleys locally, the Cuckmere, Ouse Valley, have seen extensive flooding in recent years, which has destroyed crops, makes it impossible to have cattle grazing on the land safely. The Cuckmere Valley in particular was underwater the year before last for months. And natural flood mitigation, supporting farmers in doing that, I think is critical to us having a sustainable future for water management in the South East.
Thank you very much. Amy?
I'm with Kelly. Water all the way, especially down here in the South East. I think it was Bill Clark from NIAB said that we already have the capability genetically to do 10 tonnes a hectare wheat. We don't have the water. Water will be the limiting factor. But also renewables, so maybe water lagoons with floating solar panels on top is the way forward.
Tom, can I ask you what would you buy if the government has suspended capital grants, etc., etc.
I know I'm with Flav on this completely because Mark said earlier we've got to have core strong businesses and we've got to diversify and blah 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 and what have you. Okay, that's great. So I did the whole 8 lambs a week to local pubs and butchers. It's just not sustainable. It's small fry. It really is small fry. And when you're running a dairy herd as well, you don't have the time. So a local abattoir where you could take it and then supply the local people nearby, it's great. That's what we need to do. But there's only a few farmers that can do it. But we need local infrastructure. I think maybe somewhere to process grain. Every tonne of grain I grow down here is worth £20 a tonne less than Lincolnshire because we've got no infrastructure down here in the South East. And I just think we're sort of there's a lot of the people in this room are not necessarily got their nose to the grindstone on a farm, and a lot of them are good ideas. But okay, you get out day to day, and then go and run your Twitter feed, whatever. I'm not going to do that. I've got 3 kids. I've got a life. I volunteer at this local agricultural society, and we have shows and what have you. That's my way of giving something back. We get 50,000 people through the gates there in the summer shows. So there's ways and means of doing it. But we've got to have infrastructure. If we don't have infrastructure in the South East, it's going to be very hard work.
Tom, thank you. I'm going to move it on to the next and the final question. Is Tom Harrison here? I don't think Tom's here, but he did submit a question, and I'm going to ask it because I thought it was a very short question. It's only 3 words, and we always like to, hopefully, this is going to be an upbeat question, a question with an upbeat answer. We always do like to end question time with something that is a bit upbeat. So I might be pushing my luck a bit with this one. But Tom Harrison asked, "Are farmers happy?" And I'm going to ask Amy, and then I'm going to ask Flav if he's happy.
I don't know if farmers are happy, but I would say if farmers are happy, I don't think the public sees the farmers as being happy, because the stereotype of farmers tends to be of moaning and get off my land and so on. And I know that's not accurate, but this is why I think we need to think about how we come across to the public and we get attracted to happy people, positive people. If we can be happy and positive and find a way to be that way in this industry, I think it will do us a lot of good reputationally. And can I just plug Grounded Research are doing a What Keeps Farmers Awake at Night survey. Please fill it in, go and look it up online, because actually that's the kind of information we need to know what we can do to solve some of the issues in the industry.
Thanks, Amy. Flav, are you a happy pig farmer?
What's giving me the happiness? I'd say happiness from farming, no. Especially like the previous winter being wet, having pigs outside, all that. if we didn't have our little one, I probably would have struggled even more mentally. So happiness, yes, not from farming. But I think also, like as humans, you shouldn't be happy all the time. Like there's duality, happy and sadness. I'm happy that I'm going to be making sausages for this weekend to sell, but I'm unhappy because I'm probably going to have to feed in the rain tomorrow. So,
some and some.
Yeah, some and some, I'd say. Yeah.
Some. Kelly, your clients at Savills, I'm sure they're all ecstatic and...
Always, always. I always refer to my dad, and my dad's happy. You know, he's on the farm. That's where he wants to be. He's happy. I think there's a blurred line, though, between happy and confidence and certainty. And I think across the industry, confidence has taken a knock. Confidence is low, and that's driven by uncertainty. So I certainly think there's a sombre mood across the industry. There are many that are optimistic for the future. You know, I'm certainly one of them, but there is optimism there to be had. And farmers have shown their adaptability over the years. So we will adapt. We will continue to embrace change going forward. As I mentioned before, land is absolutely vital to this government to achieve all of the aims, ambitions, targets that it needs to. And so there will be land management going forward, and I'm optimistic for the future.
James, your inbox full of happy farmers?
Not especially. I mean, look, I'm consciously said to try and be upbeat, so I'll finish upbeat and start at a slightly low place. I mean, we have alluded to it already, and I think it's probably the time to mention the mental health crisis in farming. Suicide rate amongst farmers is much higher than the national average, and it is part of a wider crisis in mental health that we're seeing. There are entire campaigns just aimed at farming in terms of improving mental health, and it is a crisis that needs to be spoken about, because until you talk about mental health, it's impossible to actually address it. So there is a major issue there, and if we're talking about people being happy, clearly there are some people who aren't, and there are some people who are no longer with us who would have been here 12 months ago because they felt so despondent about the situation they're in, partly because of the situation they're in with their particular farms. I think, though, that when I talk to farmers in my constituency, which I do a lot, we're very fortunate here. We're in a very beautiful part of the world. There are people who are farming in the national park here, and they will all say to you, there's few better things than being up on the downs as the sun rises and seeing it kind of light up the sea or the river or wherever you are, and that's a special privilege, and that's a beautiful thing to do, and they're very happy about that. So, to Flavian's point, I think it depends what time and day you get them. If you've been up since 6 o'clock in the morning milking the cows and it's been raining on you and now you've just found out the government have done some other awful thing that's going to put you out of business, then probably you're not going to be in a great mood. On the other hand, if you've had a lovely day and it's been sunny and beautiful and the lambs are dancing around and and your kids are in a good mood and they haven't kept you up all night, then probably it's a bit better. I think there is reason, though, and the point that lots of people have made, and I think is a really important point, and I'm pleased it's been made, is I think we need to tell a better story. I think there needs to be better support for those who are struggling, more acknowledgement of it. We have to acknowledge it's part of the men's mental health crisis in particular in this country, and men are very bad at talking about their mental health, and the farming industry has a gender imbalance in terms of its workforce. And that's something that we need to speak about, but there is reason for optimism, and I think we've heard a lot of that here today, and I think we probably collectively, certainly as politicians, need to tell a better story about British farming and why it is something to be optimistic about for the future, to help people, deal with some of the challenges that we're seeing right now.
Thank you very much. Thanks, James. And last but by no means least,
I think it's quite a difficult question to answer, if I'm being really frank. I've had the fortunate position of seeing it from student perspective, and I've been fortunate enough to see it from actually running farms as well, and obviously from the client advisory and the corporate side. I think being happy means different things to different people. I would just echo the point about the mental health and the existential, if you like, crisis at the minute. That cannot be I'm going to finish on positive, but that cannot be underestimated. And I've seen firsthand what it can do. And I think we must be, all of us in this room, and I think colleges are also responsible as well, as educators, we need to be mindful of what we can do to support people in that situation, because it's an extreme measure to go down that route, and there is always a solution. I'm a firm believer in solution-orientated matters. I think happiness comes down to whether you feel secure, whether you feel safe, and whether you've got a future or you're feeling hopeful. I think the industry as a whole has got a future and it is hopeful. And I said at the very beginning here about changing the narrative and the story. And I think if we do that, and there are people in here who are big influencers here, there'll be very wealthy people here, there'll be people who are not so wealthy. It is incumbent upon us to change that narrative. And I think if we do that, people will feel happier. I know when I walk into the office and people are under pressure, the whole thing just flattens, right? If you walk into an office where people are upbeat, they feel positive about things, they feel a part of a go-ahead culture, it's infectious. And people go, you know what, I'm going to make a real difference today. And do not underestimate the excitement of audit. It's a great time. So I think that's the way we do it. So I would say, are farmers happy? I would say in many ways, yes. And I think this has put a lot of stuff on the table. Do I think farmers are under pressure and finding it tough? Yes. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that. But I would say, let's go on and make a difference. And I think that will really help in the industry.
Thanks, Mark. Look, sometimes the shortest questions are the most difficult ones to answer, but thank you very much for your honesty and for not ducking the difficult situation that the industry finds itself in at the moment, but hopefully some optimism for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for our Farmers Weekly Question Time event. I think everybody's been really well behaved, which is good. And the lid didn't come off, as they say. Some fantastic questions, some fantastic answers from our panel. I'd like to thank them. Mark Lumsden-Taylor, founder and president of the Rural Policy Group think tank. Amy Jackson, a communications consultant from Oxtail PR. James McCleary, Liberal Democrat MP for Lewis. Flavian Obiero, Kenyan pig farmer from Hampshire. And Kelly Hewson-Fisher from Savills, Director and Head of Rural Research. So put your hands together and thank you, everybody.
And that's it for this special episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast, the Farmers Weekly Question Time event from Plumpton College in East Sussex. We hope you enjoyed the listen, and if you really did enjoy what you heard, please do subscribe to the Farmers Weekly podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us at podcast@fwi.co.uk, and if you're in the UK, you can message us by texting the word farm followed by your message to 88440. We'd love to hear from you on any of the topics discussed here in this episode, or indeed anything else related to agriculture in the UK. But for now, until the next episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast, I'm Johan Tasker. Thank you for listening.